record. And they're very, very closely aligned with Buddhist nationalist and extremist groups. And they are also very well known for limiting, curtailing civic space and repressing minorities and dissidents in a way that perhaps others have not really come to this extent, right? So I think we have to be very clear about the nature of the violations, the extent of the violations, the lack of accountability, the lack of previous accountability. I think minority alliances across the Tamil and Muslim community is very important at this stage. We have seen many Tamil MPs and activists standing up for Muslims, and that's something we as Muslims need to acknowledge and know that we need to offer it back when the point comes when we have to stand up for minority rights. So I think the important thing is to call them out on this racism. The majority community has many, as Shreen said, many academics, civil society activists, different groups of people have done it. And this pressure has to continue to the point that it becomes really, there's no possibility for the government to continue with this policy in a sense that makes it rational. It's already rational, but makes it seem sensible at all. So I think this continued pressure has to come from the majority community. I think, for instance, the panel, this latest panel of experts who gave their report saying that there is no problem whether you bury, COVID-19 dead bodies, should come out openly and say this is what they have said. Many of them need to speak out louder and clearer and make it clear that they were appointed by the health ministry. The prime minister asked for this expert study, and this is why is it being binned? Why is the report being binned? So I agree with Gihan that the window of opportunity is narrow. We have lost part of it, but we can keep putting more pressure in Sri Lanka. Internationally, very difficult. We can argue that the justice system has failed us. We can certainly petition the bodies that monitor these conventions on civil and political rights and on racial discrimination. Sri Lanka will be reviewed. I don't think it's, we can wait for the period in which Sri Lanka is reviewed. The Human Rights Council in March offers a good opportunity, but we need very, very strong international pressure from selected parties, particularly the OIC. The Muslim countries need to be really pushing this government to change this policy. And I'll come back to this, and I'm very happy to respond to questions on the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Farah. That was excellent. And over to you, Dr. Gihan. By the way, the questions that won't be addressed by the panel immediately will either be responded to in writing throughout this the rest of today's event, or they will be sent to the speakers, and their responses will be published by the Cordoba Foundation on our webpage. So just to assure you that hopefully no question will go amiss. Dr. Gihan, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think both questions that were directed at me are quite interesting. And I don't have a good, clear answer in terms of what we should be doing to catalyze a solution. I think Farah touched on both the national and international strategies, but I want to also draw a little bit of a skeptical picture here, because I think that relying too much on international actors may fail to capture the actual political dynamics in the country. We have a situation where the present government and the president ran campaigns that were fairly exclusively directed at the Sinhala Buddhist majority and were extremely successful. There's been this long-standing theory that you cannot win a presidential election or secure a two-thirds majority in parliament without minority support. But this government and president has proven otherwise. So there is a political calculation. I want to go back to this question of political calculation, that really the core voter base in Sri Lanka, which is from the majority community, is entertaining prejudice against the majority community, the minority community, the Muslim community, and appeasing that particular sentiment is the most politically astute thing to do. So international pressure has its limits in that context. International pressure can further entrench the polarized context in which Sri Lanka is currently finding itself. So I think as much as I really appreciate and call on the international actors to speak out and contribute, and I think that contribution is extremely important in terms of raising awareness and drawing attention to the violations of human rights and the discrimination, I have my skepticism in terms of whether it would be a panacea. I think the solution really has to be locally driven, and there has to be fault lines that are exposed even within government, within the majority community in terms of these issues. And we are starting to see that. And I think that is the window of opportunity that I refer to. We're starting to see actors even within the government come forward and say, this policy, I think, is a step too far. We've seen even really vociferous opponents of Islam who in fact have been involved in sort of anti-Muslim campaigns and all kinds of propaganda, have actually come and condemned this particular policy. So there is a different sort of line that is being drawn when it comes to the question of cremations. And I think at the end of the day, if the government was to reverse its policies, it would not be because of international pressure. It would be because it is seeing its own coalition crumbling. And I think that is the ultimate calculation that civil society activists and the international community has to sort of take. I think ultimately there has to be a way to really bring those fault lines out and hope that the government makes a political choice to discontinue the policy.
Dr. Gehan, thank you very, very much. And my thanks and gratitude to the entire panel of this particular event, the first panel, Afzal Khan MP, Shireen Surur, Farah Miller, and Gehan Gunatillaka. It's my gratitude and thanks to each and every one of you for sparing the time. I understand that those of you in Sri Lanka are now beyond midnight, so our thanks for your efforts and for the insight that you added. Once again, the questions on the Q&A panel are there for you to respond to as you feel fit. And those questions that won't be addressed, we will send to you at a later date so that your answers could then be published by the Cordoba Foundation on our website. So allow me now to move to the second part of this event. And we have an equally illustrious and also quite a diverse panel of speakers. It gives me great pleasure to invite to speak first a great friend of the Cordoba Foundation over the years, Rabbi Herschel Gluck, OBE, who is the president of Shomrim, Stamford Hill, London, chairman of the Arab Jewish Forum, and the founder and chairman of the Muslim Jewish Forum. And as I invite you, Rabbi, to switch on your camera and switch on your microphone, I would also like to remind our guests tonight to pose their questions on the Q&A panel, and also if they wish to pose a direct question, to raise their hand so that we can then pick them to address the panel directly. So over to you, Rabbi. 7 minutes.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this evening's discussion. This is an issue which is very close to my heart on many levels. Human rights is something which I care passionate about, and respect for the dead and dealing with the dead in a sensitive manner is something that I have campaigned for many decades. And therefore I have a lot of experience with regards to dealing with government and international bodies with respect to this matter. But first of all, I want to address the issue of burial versus cremation. Why is burial so important to the Abrahamic religions? And the answer is because we believe that a person, every single human being, is created in the image of God. And therefore, if you burn a person, even a person after death, one is committing a crime against God himself. And therefore this goes to the very essence of what we believe in. And therefore cremation is something which is totally outside the pale of all Abrahamic religions in the essence. To the degree that we learn.
Sorry, man.
Hello?
Yes, carry on, Rabbi. We can hear you loud and clear.
To the degree that we, in the Torah, the obligation to bury is stated by someone who is the ultimate bad person. And we're told that that person has to be buried on the same night. Because every human being, however evil that we might think they are still God's children and created in his image. I would go even further. We all know the story of the Jews being enslaved in Egypt. And after Pharaoh had already given permission for the Jews to be freed from slavery, there were those Egyptians who pursued them and were ultimately drowned in the sea miraculously. We are told that even those who were drowned in the sea were spat out by the sea in order that they should be able to be buried, because burial touches the very core of respect and dignity for human beings. However evil and however bad they might be, they still deserve, as for the very fact that they are human, created in God's image, they deserve to be buried. In the UK, as Dr. Afzal Khan mentioned earlier, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there was a debate regarding burial or cremation. And everyone came out in unison that burial is not in any way a danger as far as COVID-19 is concerned. And as we've seen from the beginning about a year ago of the COVID pandemic, communities bury those who have died, sadly, from COVID-19, and it has not had a negative effect on anything or anyone. And therefore, for Sri Lanka to say that it is doing this because of COVID-19 when the rest of the world has clearly demonstrated that burial does not have a negative effect on the nation's health is extremely disturbing. I would also like to note that before it was mentioned if the pressure should be made on the local government or international pressure. I don't think one excludes the other. I think both are extremely important. Local pressure and also international pressure. And I want to mention that Britain has a duty under the Freedom of Religion panel that in the Foreign Office there has been a tremendous emphasis put on freedom of religion throughout the world. And therefore they should deliver, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, that where such a basic freedom of religion is being denied to the most unfortunate people, those who have died through COVID-19, and the families who are bereaved by their deaths. So therefore the British government does have a moral duty to express its passion for freedom of religion to see that the human rights of people in Sri Lanka should be respected. I am very, very glad to have this opportunity to join in with you, and I wish you all a lot of success.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Herschel Gluck, OBE. Thank you. It was a great pleasure, as always, to have you on our panels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Reverend Bonnie Evans Hills, who's also a long-standing friend of the Cordova Foundation and someone who always gives us incredibly important and unique insights from a faith perspective. She's a priest in the Scottish Episcopal Church and who has worked the EU Commission on Foreign Affairs and Security, the World Council of Churches, Churches Together in Britain and Ireland, the Anglican Communion and the Anglican Mission Organization, USPG, the United States for Partners in the Gospel. She continues to contribute to the UN Office for the Prevention of Genocide's Global Plan of Action for Religious Leaders and Actors. She's a co-author of Engaging Islam from a Christian Perspective. For the next 7 minutes, Reverend Bonnie Evans Hills will be talking about Faith Perspectives Christianity. Over to you.
Yes, hello.
Hello, Bonnie.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Grand. It's a huge privilege to be here, and especially to follow our wonderful Rabbi Herschel. It's such an honor. Thank you. I think I'm wanting to address this coming from the perspective of freedom of religion and belief, and the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18, which provides all humans, every single individual on this planet, with the freedom of religion or belief. We are free to hold the beliefs that we hold and to be able to express those. But all of the human rights that are expressed in that declaration stand in relation to one another, and human life and dignity takes precedence over all. Article 29 outlines that alongside these rights is a responsibility to ensure the rights of others are preserved and protected. My rights should not infringe on the rights of others. As we've heard many times this evening, and I think it bears repeating, that the World Health Organization has confirmed that burial or cremation are both suitable disposal of human remains with regard to the COVID virus, and the infection will not be passed on through either means. Those for whom burial rather than cremation is an important religious ritual are fully within their rights to demand an explanation from authorities when burial is refused. In the case of Sri Lanka, Muslims make up about 10% of the population. And as we have heard from Shireen, there are possibly, well, as I understand it, as of the 10th of December, there were 50 Muslim deaths due to COVID. And I understand from Shireen that there were more. There have been more since. But this would only be a tiny proportion of the population. But the repercussions of the forced cremations has had a much, much bigger effect with regard to the impact on what is a minority community, one which has already suffered from mob attacks in recent years and more from armed conflict up until 2009. Even if scientific argument could be made for enforced cremation, what pastoral support has been offered to those families? It must be acknowledged that COVID has hit us all hard across the globe, and governments are struggling to know how best to contain the virus and protect their populations, particularly in a world so used to international travel and trade. But along with that confusion, some priority must be given to the mental health and well-being of communities, particularly those who are living as minorities. We have heard that families were handed the ashes of their loved ones and then expected to pay for the cremation and for the coffins that they were cremated in. sensitivity as to the religious implication of such actions and the indignation that it causes would have been warranted. I am loath to suggest that lack of attention was grounded in cultural discrimination or racism against minority religious groups in Sri Lanka. It's a serious accusation to be made. But the actions that have been taken do prove this out. This lack of consideration and compassion has greater repercussions as a cause of increased community tension and fear at a time when all nations need to be working together. There is a price to pay for such discrimination. We know that epidemics are a regular occurrence, and wise governments have prepared stocks of essentials and kept emergency plans in place. Unfortunately, endeavors at austerity, such as in the UK, have meant that some of those preparations were done away with. And it's worth bearing in mind for future that collaborative teams be established which are trained not only in emergency response, but also a response appropriate for the religious sensibilities of a nation's populace. This is also part of our human rights. There will be times, such as in Ebola, when disposal of human remains present a highly toxic threat to human life. And I understand all religions place a priority on preservation of human life above anything else. Where religious sensibilities can be accommodated, as it appears it should have and could have taken place in Sri Lanka, these must be provided for, that of providing burial. Some of that responsibility will of necessity need to come from within the religious communities themselves, but needs the full support and cooperation, collaboration of national authorities and governments. If we're looking solely at the pandemic, governments must work for ways of pulling people together and ensuring the rights of all people. Any act of discrimination and racism puts the whole of the populace at risk. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bonnie, that was fantastic and quite inspiring. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. We have a few comments coming in from our Facebook followers today. Suraya Dean posted, thank you, great forum, brilliant panel. I totally agree. She carries on, average Muslim must start talking to their Buddhist neighbors on this issue. Again, I think everyone would agree with that. The next act of discrimination, she goes on to say, is not too far away, God forbid. There's also a comment from Dr. Naushad Khan. Burying the body is the last and most important respect we give. This is Abrahamic religious belief. And a comment from David H. This is a brave move by the Cordoba Foundation and partners. Keep up the good work. Burial is a right of the deceased. And once again, I remind everyone to post your questions on the Q&A panel or raise your hands if you wish to pose your question directly to this panel. Our next speaker is Dr. Kenneth Holloway. He's a Buddhist Dharma instructor and Levinson Chair, Florida Atlantic University. He's the author and professor of East Asian religion, including Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Active in interfaith discussions, including events held at the United Nations and the Interfaith Center of New York. He'll be speaking for the next 7 minutes on the importance of last rites from an interfaith perspective, especially Buddhists. Over to you, Dr. Kenneth Holloway.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share a Buddhist perspective on these very sad events in Sri Lanka. The one major reason why I'm here today is because Dr. Abdullah Falik reached out to my organization, For Guangsan, and came to our Buddha Museum in Kaohsiung in 2017 to participate in our event When Buddha Meets the Gods. Our goal in this event is to bring religions together to celebrate our common values, particularly to pray for world peace. And that year, we were very blessed to have members of Islam come to this celebration, which includes tens of thousands of people of all faiths, to celebrate this common ground of peace. Because we believe strongly in Buddhism that all faiths need to be not just respected, but to be celebrated together. And that's why I'm here today, to share my sadness with this very unfortunate event. And another side of how Buddhism and Islam really should be partnered is in the fall of 2019. My organization held our executive board meeting at UNESCO headquarters in Paris. And I'm a ex officio member of that executive committee. Every single member of the board traveled to Bussy St. George, a mosque, where we learned from an imam about the values of peace of Islam. And so Buddhism should and must embrace the diversity of religions, particularly Abrahamic religions, but we must not discriminate. The Vimalakirti Sutra says it very clearly. The Buddha speaks with one voice, but he is heard differently by different people. And because of that, Buddhism must treat all people equally and respect them. Because everyone has potential in Buddhism. We believe strongly that everyone has the potential to be enlightened. And because of that, if you discriminate against one person, you simultaneously descend on a slippery slope where you deny the potential for enlightenment that is inherent to all beings. You deny it to everyone. So for this religion to discriminate in this way in Sri Lanka is really against the core teachings of what the Buddha taught us. But this equality does not mean that each person needs to be treated identically. Quite to the contrary, we need to celebrate the different religious practices that are across the world. Buddhists are often minorities in countries across the world, such as in America, such as the United Kingdom, such as in Africa. And because of that, we need to be particularly sensitive to all forms of discrimination. And that makes the forced cremations in Sri Lanka really something that needs to be spoken out against by members of Buddhism. That's why I'm here. The forced cremations in Sri Lanka are something that bring me great sadness, because it is an unspeakable cruelty to add to the burden of a family which is already suffering the sadness of the loss of a loved one. Based on the findings of scientists around the world, there does not seem to be any practical need to force these cremations. And so that's why I'm here to call for action against that. But also I want to be sensitive that I'm coming to you as someone from the United States. And I don't want to give the impression that my country does this very well either. At the height of the pandemic in New York, the right to administer last rites, the right to speedy burials, it was not possible. But it does not seem that Sri Lanka is in the same situation. So my point is to say that America is certainly not a country where religious rights are always respected. So I don't want to try and present this in this way that we have everything figured out here. Quite to the contrary, it's because of our failings, because of our shortcomings, that I hope that Sri Lanka can also work hard to right this really terrible situation, because truly it is not in keeping with the teachings of the Buddha. And if it's not in keeping with the teachings of the Buddha, then it shouldn't be done. And so I hope that we can come together as members of faith communities together to support each other in this time and in times in the future when there are injustices, because it is only by coming together. We cannot face these things alone. It is only through our joined work as members of a common faith community that we can hope to bring positive change to this world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kenneth Holloway. It's a pleasure having you and knowing you, and hopefully this will be the start of long friendship between ourselves. Thank you for that. Our next speaker is Andreas Kleiser, and he's speaking today from The Hague. He kindly stepped in at the very last minute as we had invited Catherine Bomberger, the Director General of the International Commission on Missing Persons, but due to something that came up, she had to apologize. So Andreas kindly stepped in. He's a Director of Policy and Cooperation at the International Commission on Missing Persons at The Hague. He's active in the field of international cooperation since 1995 and a former executive officer at the Council of Europe. He led ICMP's, that's the International Commission on Missing Persons, first disaster response operation for Thailand authorities. Account for the missing from the 2004 Southeast Asia tsunami. Andreas has negotiated numerous cooperation and other agreements between ICMP and intergovernmental and other organizations, including the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. So Andreas, for the next 7 minutes, he's going to speak to us about forced cremations and undue infringement on human rights. Over to you, Andreas.
Thank you, and thank you for all the organizers. Now, I want to take this opportunity to point to a rule of law dimension. So I will not specifically address religious freedom, but the rule of law more generally. Now, the International Commission on Missing Persons is an intergovernmental organization to ensure the cooperation of governments and other authorities in locating missing persons for involuntary reasons and to assist them in doing so. Under Article 2 of the ICMP Treaty, ICMP is also mandated to contribute to the development of appropriate expressions and of commemoration and tribute to the missing. I will briefly offer considerations in respect of the subject matter before us, beginning with the appropriate expressions of commemoration and tribute, as that's stated in the mandate, and then address the more procedural points concerning rule of law aspects. What is an appropriate expression and commemoration of tribute? We've heard first, it would surely be one that concords with the rights of others, including the right to life and security. Forms of commemoration that incite violence or otherwise threaten the well-being of others would then be inappropriate. In the context of COVID-19, there have been various suggestions early during the pandemic that burials pose a health risk and that cremations are safer. And these included some US states, India, where corresponding legislation has since been repealed. As we've heard, according to the World Health Organization, there is no key evidence until now that a person can get infected from the dead bodies of COVID-19 patients. Still, not all common ritual acts are currently permitted in rule of law countries. For instance, in many countries, washing dead bodies, lying in state, or viewing the body is currently disallowed. Still, these comparatively lighter COVID restrictions are having a toll on families, suffering trauma and guilt by not being able to carry out traditional burial procedures. Suffering and trauma should not be left unattended and addressed timely. In addition, these restrictions also lead to direct impact on the rights to survivors. A case needs to be made that mandating cremations as the only permitted form of disposing of bodies is an excessive interference with the right of survivors to dispose of the bodies of deceased relatives in an appropriate commemorative manner, including as mandated by religious belief. That right is usually seen as part of the right to life and rule of law guarantees. And I note here that the right to life, Article 6 of the ICCPR, is not included in the Constitution of Sri Lanka. However, Article 11, freedom from torture, in conjunction with Article 13, freedom from arbitrary punishment, have been seen to imply a right to life. And the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka has also stated that the values embodied in the Constitution, including the dignity and well-being of people, as well as Sri Lanka's obligations under various international treaties, reinforce the right to life. Thus, the attention of the judiciary is invoked here and should be pursued. In terms of procedural considerations and obligations, a dimension of the forced cremation situation that has not been touched upon is that states have an obligation to conduct effective investigations of disappearances. The right to an effective investigation belongs to relatives of the missing. Like the right to a burial, also the right to an effective investigation is based on the right to life. And there again, the considerations of the Supreme Court apply and should be invoked. The right to an effective investigation means that states have to deploy means capable of establishing the facts leading to a disappearance or a person going missing, as well as of the fate of the person and his or her whereabouts, and to do so by standards of evidence required in courts of law. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to significant increase of unidentified victims. There's a strong case for arguing that an unidentified victim should not be cremated because the risk of undercutting the right to an effective investigation is too high. A rule requiring that the body of every COVID-19 victim should be cremated would appear an excessive infringement on the right to an effective investigation and by implication, the right to life. It should also be considered in light of the Supreme Court statement concerning the right to life in Sri Lanka. In this context and in closing, I would like to note that the United Nations Committee and Working Group on Enforced Disappearance have released guidelines concerning COVID-19, including that states have an obligation to ensure that the relatives of persons who have died as a result of COVID-19 or other causes must systematically be given the opportunity to identify the remains, and all remains must be dealt with in line with their tradition, religion, or culture, despite the various challenges that may be raised by the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas. That was excellent. I really appreciate it, and once again appreciate that you managed to find the time to step in at the very last moment. Much appreciated. Last but not least, we said at the very start that the Muslim Council of Britain, one of the organizations that are supporting this event tonight, has formed a task force for Sri Lanka addressing this particular issue. And the campaign, as mentioned by Afzal Khan MP, is one that is gaining momentum and is reaching far and wide. To tell us more about this, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Zara Muhammad, who's the Assistant Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. She's the chair of the MCB Sri Lanka Task Force and former president of the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, FOSIS for short. She'll be speaking for the next 7 minutes on the Muslim Council of Britain and legal action against the Sri Lankan government. Over to you, Zara.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Anas, and thank you so much to the Cordoba Foundation for tonight's program, and also from the Muslim Council of Britain, our express solidarity to everybody, whether it be the families here in the UK or in Sri Lanka that are suffering the devastating consequences from this heinous policy by the Sri Lankan government. Now, when this matter was brought to our attention at the Muslim Council of Britain by our Sri Lankan-based affiliates, we were quite shocked how much of a lack of awareness was actually being put to this issue at hand. That there was very little media attention, very little international commentary, and even awareness amongst ourselves that this was actually happening. And as many of our speakers have already alluded to, this is a critical issue for Muslims. It fundamentally goes against our belief and respect to our wishes for the bereaved and dead. So on the back of that and the urgency of the situation, the MCB set up a task force, which is made by medical experts, lawyers, our Sri Lankan-based affiliates, as well as senior leaders and activists within the UK. And the remit of this task force was really to look at what critical action could we take to make a real difference on the ground for the people of Sri Lanka, and also to raise the awareness of the issue, to make sure people actually knew what was happening. And quite quickly, we were able to galvanize a lot of support and traction for the issue. We have wrote letters to the Sri Lankan High Commission, as well as Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, and we've reached out to interfaith leaders, community organizations, and many other parts of civil society, that this is an issue that is actually a human rights violation. It's not a Muslim-only issue, but it's one that has not only local consequence, but global impact. Because what the actions of the Sri Lankan government are doing is saying that it is okay for a state actor to, I guess, marginalize and fundamentally go against its minority ethnic population. So really, the consequence of these actions is not one that we want any state to repeat, particularly in the guise of a pandemic. And as other speakers have alluded to, politicizing the suffering that people are already enduring at this time is in no way acceptable. Now, as we have continued this work, what we realize is that the people of Sri Lanka themselves, that the domestic courts were not getting an answer from the Sri Lankan Judicial Authority, nor from the government itself, despite the repeated evidence that was presented, and even recently, more evidence which has been presented. And so we have decided to take action at a legal level, and that is to submit a complaint to the United Nations Human Rights Committee. Now, because the Sri Lankan government has accepted the competence of the United Nations Human Rights Committee, and for anyone to allegedly, make aware a violation that they have perpetrated against the ICCPR, it therefore allowed us an avenue to do this on behalf of the Sri Lankan people affected as the MCB. And we hope that this will be a really important step in pushing the Sri Lankan government to reverse its policy. So I guess at this high level, this is some of the critical action we're taking right now. As well as that, we're continuing to work and put pressure on the international community to make a statement to challenge the actions of this government, because this is just completely unacceptable for all. And I really want to give thanks to all of my colleagues on the task force and to everybody who has been supporting, whether it's been to donate to our legal fund, writing to us. And so many have also expressed their thanks to the MCB for getting involved, because there was a deafening silence on this issue. And I think it's been really pertinent even of the Cordoba Foundation to have this event tonight and bringing along so many different civil society actors as well as activists from Sri Lanka who have expressed their horror and distraught at what has been happening. So from the MCB, we will continue to support our communities and our community interests. And also we hope that this policy will be reversed immediately. The evidence is astoundingly in support of the fact that this is wrong on so many grounds, and especially on a human rights basis. And for all of us, I hope that we will all be able to write to our MPs, write to critical decision makers, and to continue to make a noise about what is affecting not just people far away from us, but all of us in this global crisis and pandemic where many of us are losing our loved ones. Imagine being in a situation where not only can you not say farewell to them, but also that they're cremated against your wishes as a family and their faith. So that's everything from me. And really, again, thank you so much to the Cordoba Foundation for such a fantastic lineup this evening.
Thank you very much, Zara, and thank you to the Muslim Council of Britain and its task force, and our prayers and best wishes for your success, and that this comes to an end that we are all hoping for. It's quite fantastic, the numbers of questions that are pouring in from through our Q&A panel, as well as through our Facebook. We're getting loads of questions, and I have to say that our speakers, particularly from Sri Lanka, have been hard at work answering virtually every single one of them. But I'd like to pose a question to our faith representatives today, Rabbi Herschel, Reverend Bonnie Evans Hills, and Professor Kenneth Holloway. What can be actually done to the members of your faith communities in order to inform them of what is happening, and maybe also invite them to take on a particular form of active role in addressing this particular issue? Because, I mean, obviously we're talking here about the minorities, the Muslim and Christian minorities in Sri Lanka, but it actually could be anyone. I mean, only a few years back, I recall China, for instance, doing the same also with a particular faith minority over there. And it could, happen elsewhere. So what can faith leaders or faith representatives such as yourselves do to invite your community members to take on a form of action? What can be done in order to raise awareness and actually bring faith communities all together in order to defend the rights of the minorities in Sri Lanka today? Shall I start with you, Rabbi Herschel? If you'd like to unmute, please, first.
Good idea. I think most people, most Jewish people, are not aware of this issue in Sri Lanka. If they would be aware, they would empathize very strongly with the Muslim minority in Sri Lanka, because for us, the idea of cremation is something which most Jews find very, very difficult to stomach. So therefore, when we know that a minority community is being forced to cremate bodies, this is something which touches the Jewish community very deeply. And if Jews would be aware of this issue, the vast majority of Jews would come out very strongly, whatever their political affiliation, to help the Muslim community in this situation.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Herschel. I'm grateful. Reverend Bonnie Evans-Hill, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I think among Christians, there's a mixed practice about either burial or cremation. I mean, historically, it's not, cremation has not been part of our tradition, but it's become increasingly so. So that kind of, I think where it would be more emotive, I guess, within the Christian community would be about the concern for what Andreas spoke about, which is the right to dispose of the dead or bury or say farewell, the last rites, provide the last rites for the people that we love. And if that opportunity is not provided, then there's a certain outrage, and that outrage is incredibly justified, of course. I mean, I'm reminded of when I visited Tuzla in Bosnia, which is the place where they are examining the remains of those who died in the genocide in Bosnia in the 1990s, and the emotions that brings up, the next of kin that are left, and there's only small parts of bodies of the people that they loved available. That right to bury the dead, to provide the last rites is a huge that is equated with the right to life. I was actually quite flabbergasted by that realization from Andreas, and I think this is quite a profound thing to be thinking about. But I do know that among the Christian community there would be a certain it's essential that people be able to provide for the people that they loved and to be able to say goodbye, and that they're not is just appalling. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bonnie. Before I come to you, Kenneth, if I may, there's a statement that or a comment that was left on the Facebook page by Richard Rioch, saying many of Sri Lanka's leading civil society organizations have appealed to the government to end the forcible cremations of Muslims who have died from COVID-19. These measures affect more than one religious group, but it is particularly terrifying for Muslims for whom the burial of dead is a non-negotiable religious practice. They feel targeted, bullied, and threatened by the manner in which the government is acting on this. They stated in an appeal launched on the 3rd of December. So Kenneth, over to you. What do you think the Buddhist community can do in this regard?
I think the key is to humanize this and to help the Buddhist community to see the suffering of these parents in the same light that we ourselves experience suffering. My temple in Miami, Florida, is a 15-minute drive from the Parkland High School where there was a shooting. The Chinese New Year's Eve 3 years ago, we lost Peter Wong, who was holding open the door for his classmates to escape through. He was shot and he was buried by our temple. And to watch the sadness of his parents at that moment, when a parent loses a child, that is tragic. When my father talked to me at my mother's passing, he said that this is not a tragedy. This is part of a son's duty to his mom and dad to bury them. It's when it's reversed. When a parent loses a child, that's a real tragedy. And he used that to contextualize the incredible sadness I had at that time. And I feel like this common humanity that we share as humans with children and parents, that's the key to helping people to see that we are sharing this times. And this is not about my religion versus your religion. This is about us as human beings and our common humanity, that it is really a terrible thing when a parent is undergoing that tragic moment to make it worse. And I believe that's the answer. And to help Buddhists to see that is the way forward.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. Much appreciated. Andreas, now where I have to say that I'm amongst the throng of people not saying it, but I have to confess that I'm thinking it. Is this a step towards what, God forbid, could be much, much worse? Are we looking at a government, once this passes without any kind of international pressure, without real serious redress from the international community, could go on a spree that could cause death and mayhem amongst the minorities?
Well, naturally difficult to predict, but I think we have already seen some strife, of course, very visibly between communities, and I mean that can be aggravated, and we've seen it in the past. Concerning the international community and intergovernmental organizations in particular, we do know of the extensive efforts of the High Commission on Human Rights in Sri Lanka. ICMP has itself extensively discussed the situation of missing persons and the impact on social cohesion of the missing persons problem. Also on the rule of law and even on economic development, and has received also a serious support from state parties and others in terms of being able to assist the government in taking concrete steps to address this issue and to strengthen what is obviously contested, a trust in public institutions, which needs to be bolstered, but not only the trust, also institutions need to be more trustworthy. We continue to make these offers, and but it is of course incumbent on the government to continue the discussion and eventually to accept our offers and the assistance we can provide in creating more trust between population and state institutions, including the judiciary. Yeah.
If you were, Andreas, if I may, if you were to draw a roadmap for the activists who are campaigning against the Sri Lankan government's decision to cremate bodies without the consent of their families, what would you advise them to do? Where should they go knocking on? Which courts, and what case should they carry?
I would much advise, and I think the missing persons context is actually quite, that's why I was trying to speak about this, holds important instructions, because we are not, perhaps it is helpful to address the issue from the dimension of the right to life, which holds procedural guarantees, which is not necessarily invoking as the first element religious practice, but invokes as the first element the rule of law, of stability, and the trust in judicial institutions. And the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka in its exploration of how a right to life can be construed under the Constitution, has been rather forthcoming. So to expound these ideas and to show that what we're doing here is actually going against the constitutional development that one has seen in the Sri Lankan judiciary could be one avenue to pursue. And I understand, I mean, that efforts have been made to bring cases and it has not been successful so far, but of course that does not keep us from advocacy, yes.
Thank you so much, Andreas, I appreciate that. And last but not least, we have a question who is posted by an anonymous attendee to the MCB. So Zara, over to you. 4 questions. I'm not entirely sure whether the 4 pertain to you, but let's see. The first is, what do we achieve by going to the court or the HRC? Which court is specialized with the matter that will be heard? Does the government of Sri Lanka come under this court's jurisdiction? What is next after obtaining the judgment? So I'll leave you with those, but the question that was posed several times and has been probably addressed by some of the panelists in writing, the former panelists in writing, is regards why is it that we are hearing so little from, let's say, the Muslim world in defense of the Muslim minority in Sri Lanka? Why is it that we haven't really seen or heard of government spokesmen standing up and actually saying something about this? You know, a word of condemnation or some sort of economic pressure or the such. Why is that, do you think?
Yes, that's fine. I think to the 4 questions, I'll probably type to the detail of that from our legal team, because I don't want to get that information wrong. But it's a different type of complaint that we're making at this stage. Now, regards to the international community, I think I definitely echo the feeling that we are waiting, and we have been, through our networks, definitely trying to get a message of support and of challenge. And I think, unfortunately, there still is a lot of silence from Muslim nations and different Muslim countries. What we have seen is a lot of civil society organizations across the globe, all the way to Australia, across America, Europe, of course. So there is a lot of voices being heard, but yes, I believe we are still waiting. I think there is a lot of dynamics, socioeconomic, political, and those tend to be the reasons why, they hesitate, because there are other relationships and things at stake here in this globalized world that we're operating in. So I believe that, we're doing our best to contact as many of those regional, international organizations, bodies and states that we can. But it is unfortunately quite disappointing that we haven't seen or heard from any key state actor yet.
Thank you very much. And it leaves me only to thank each and every one of you. Rabbi Herschel, Reverend Bonnie, Professor Kenneth Holloway, Andreas and Zara. You've all been fantastic, and you've added an incredibly important perspective, indeed perspectives, to the discussion of the day. So my thanks and gratitude to you all. And once again, we might, as the questions pour in, we might address some of the questions to you, and we'd appreciate if you write back, and we'll have those answers published on our webpage. This discussion has been an eye-opener. It's highlighted key issues in respect to something which, for some odd reason, hasn't really reached the corners of attention of public opinion that it should. There have been 2 or 3 questions that are along a similar theme about what the Cordoba Foundation intends to do, what can do. The Cordoba Foundation, when it comes across issues of this particular nature, it usually does 3 things. The first is it collects information through research, studies, surveys, collecting data and information from specialists, talking to people on the ground, so that basically we have a complete dossier on the event at hand. And therefore you'll find on our website many dossiers and files and briefs and studies on various issues from around the world pertaining to human rights, to democracy, to freedoms and the such. And the second step is that then we try to bring this case to the public's attention. The public, because that is how public pressure mounts, and also upon decision makers. And today we had the pleasure of having Afzal Khan MP, who's doing quite well on this, but we will continue to push him and his colleagues to do even more. And the third is a call to action. We have to do something about these things. Knowing about them is one thing, bringing them to the attention of others is another important step, but also doing something is something which is crucial. And those three elements of every single case that we handle at the Cordoba Foundation is something that allows us to address these issues properly, not only in terms of us knowing about them, knowing of them, and letting others know of them, but also doing something in order to help and assist and alleviate the pain and suffering. So with that, it leaves me only to close with a few notes. The first is that I can only thank and express my own appreciation and gratitude to all those who participated, our guests from around the world. I'd like to thank the speakers, and especially those in faraway places from the United States to Sri Lanka and everywhere in between. And thank you to the supporting organizations, the Sri Lankan Islamic Forum of UK, the Muslim Council of Britain, the People's Rights Group, Universal Human Rights Council. A few points. We hope that everyone today, whether joined us here on this Zoom webinar or through our Facebook page, we hope that you've all benefited from the extremely useful insights that we heard from all the speakers today. Evidence that burials have an important place in the lives and religions of minorities in Sri Lanka, especially Muslims and Christians, is without doubt, and something that today our faith leaders, as well as our activists and lawyers, have expressed quite coherently and eloquently. We're delighted, I have to say, that I have to thank Dr. Kenneth Holloway, who's a practicing Buddhist and a teacher of Buddhism, who could join us today and managed to share with us the aspects of what he mentioned is the common humanity of us all. And this is a sure sign that we should unite on common issues, regardless of what differs us or what separates us. And therefore, I would like to put that particular note on record. Forced cremations must be seen as not just an exclusively Muslim issue. It affects wider communities, not only in Sri Lanka, but far beyond. And that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. Our complaint and petition is not against the Sri Lankan people, but their government, which has been complicit in targeting minorities, particularly Muslims, along with Christians. Once again, when we talk about Sri Lanka, it's important that we separate between our address of policies adopted by the government and the people of the country, the vast majority of whom are people whom one would assume would agree with the position expressed almost unanimously today. We call on the international community to extend support to this global call for the Sri Lankan government to reverse its unjust and scientifically flawed basis for forced cremations. The Cordoba Foundation remains committed to stay the course until the end of this campaign, until the forced cremations policy is reversed and minorities can live in peace and harmony without fear and persecution, and hopefully the kind of nightmare scenario that I posed to Andreas will never, ever come close to occurring. And lastly, I'd like to remind everyone that our webpage, the CordobaFoundation.com, is there for all the updates on this campaign and many other campaigns and developments that are occurring. Please feel free to contact us for any information or updates that you may require. Share this clip once it is published on Facebook, and keep in touch for requests to volunteer or to train, and also follow the work of the Muslim Council of Britain, especially the legal action of the